I am so delighted to be here with Roz Brewer. Roz knows I am literally one of her biggest fans. I was a fan before I knew her, and then when we met and got to work together, it was just magic. So I really do appreciate that she would come to my city and do this for the Economic Club of Chicago, which I hold so dear, and give the Chicago community, especially the Chicago business community, the chance to get to know someone that I think is so very impressive. So I want to start with a big, broad, sweeping, easy question. When you were a girl, a little girl, what did you dream for yourself?
So first of all, no question coming from Mellody Hobson is ever easy. And sitting next to the vice chair of Starbucks board, which is ultimately my boss, this is a very intimidating moment for me. So no question is easy. I feel like I have a slip up somewhere in this conversation today.
Because I'm such a hard ass.
And then staring at me is Mary Dillon, another member of the board of Starbucks. So, and then behind her is my husband. So I've got a lot of bosses here today. So let me think about that one. So growing up, what did I ever think that I was going to be? So I really never had like these big grandiose dreams, Mellody, that I would be at some level. I knew that early on, probably middle of elementary school, I realized that I had a pretty strong voice. Right? I knew that there was something festering in me, so I knew that I wouldn't be the most quiet child in my classroom. I got expelled from school in 3rd grade.
Wow.
In my
For
math
what?
class. And so I knew I had to do something. At least my parents knew they had to do something with that, because you just don't get expelled for like, I mean, I didn't skip school. I just decided to take the chalk and start teaching the 3rd grade math class, and Miss Neri thought that wasn't good. And that was at the time where you got spanking, so I got a spanking by Miss Neri. And then my dad had to come to the school, and we knew my parents had to do something. So they started channeling me into different things to keep me busy. And so I've been active and vocal for a long time, 8 years old.
And when you got expelled, which is fascinating, how did they talk to you about that? I mean, did they express disappointment, or they knew they had a different kind of child? Because I would imagine that'd be a very important moment in your life.
So it was important because I'm the youngest of 5, and I grew up in the time where, you know, kids were seen and not heard. So, you know, we had the get dressed for Sunday dinner, everybody eat together kind of thing on Sundays, and everybody sat in the same seat. And we had these passing conversations, and so for me to blurt out in class was a really bad thing. You know, they felt like, okay, what are we going to do with this? Is she acting out, or do we have something else here? But eventually, as they began to channel me into different things, I began to play the violin, played piano. They knew that I just had, you know, I had a different level of energy. And I think, too, being the youngest, I felt empowered by I had 3 older sisters and a brother, and I felt empowered. You know, I got thrown around a lot as the youngest. And so I always had to fight my way through things. You know, the last piece of bread on the table was mine. And so I think that all came together. My parents realized they had something different. I was the first one to leave Michigan to go away to college. And so it was just from the very beginning of 8 years old, they knew they had to channel me or else it wasn't going to be good.
We have that in common. I'm the youngest of 6, and I always joke that I didn't know what a chicken breast was until I was 18.
Oh, yeah.
Because I only had the wing.
Oh, yeah, and like
I thought that was chicken.
Yeah, and true story. So my lunchbox, so my oldest sisters would make my lunch, and so I'd have ham and mayonnaise. No, bread and mayonnaise, because my oldest sisters took the ham. And so that's why I hate mayonnaise to this day. I can't stand even the smell of it. So
how did chemistry lead you to retail?
That's a good question. So, you know,
you majored in chemistry.
Majored in chemistry at Spelman College, and actually, you know, when you're in the STEM sciences and math area, you know, it's all about the analytics and having that analytic mind, and I think that's what really led me to, one, be able to operate, right, because there's a lot of planning and visionary work that has to be done, but it all starts with analytics, and there's math in retail. There's math. I started off as an organic chemist, and so I did that for 5 years for Kimberly-Clark in true bench chemistry. Really boring thing. Would only recommend it to a few. I realized that, I wanted to be able to have a broader discussion than just what's happening behind the chemistry bench. And so,
did you know when you were majoring in chemistry that it wouldn't be a career for you, or did you think it would be a career?
No, I thought it would be a career. I thought maybe I would either do research for a company, or I'd be a PhD chemist, or maybe even in the medical field. I went to a technical high school in Detroit, Cass Tech High School. And I was a chemistry biology major in high school, so I knew the sciences just kept propelling in me. But after a while, I knew that working as an individual contributor wasn't interesting to me. And as a chemist or a scientist, sometimes you find yourself in that space. And that wasn't working for me. I was having flashbacks of me acting out in the 3rd grade, right? And so I didn't want that to happen, so I really convinced leadership at Kimberly-Clark to consider me in a sales or technical sales field, and it eventually worked out after a period of time.
I always find that when you talk to people who've achieved the kind of success that you have, there are pivotal moments in a career. Mm-hmm. Can you isolate 1 or 2 of those where you think it made the difference between what could have been and what you are today?
Yes. I think about when I was at Kimberly-Clark, we were trying to transform ourselves from a paper company to a consumer products company. And I got thrown on the M&A team to really evaluate all of the intellectual property that we were looking at in these companies. And it was the most grueling work that I had ever done. It was 24/7. It went on for months on end. And I'm sitting with all the financial team. I didn't have a financial background, didn't have an MBA. A lot of the strategy and development folks did. But I didn't realize that I was learning all that time, right? And so I'm valuing the IP. They're telling me what we can afford. We're looking at branding. We're looking at culture of the 2 companies, and we're talking about if they've invested in this kind of technology, well, what kind of company are they? And I was just growing through all this and never really realized it. And it was a pivotal moment because at the end of that assignment, which went on for about 2 years, I actually got to run one of the entities. And so it was an absolute game changer for me because it solidified that I wasn't just a research scientist, that I could exist on the business side, and I did. And so I never looked back, never went back to research and development.
Did they
again.
tap you, or did you raise your hand? How did that work?
They actually tapped me. I did not raise my hand because I didn't understand M&A. I didn't even know what that was.
But to run the business?
To run the business, they tapped me, yes.
So they saw the potential?
Yes, yes. I think it was the conversations that we were engaging in. I mean, I was somewhat of a sponge just hearing. It was so exciting to hear about bringing 2 companies together that it was just fueling my brain. So when we were talking about the final, go or no go decisions on these acquisitions, my engagement was so much broader than just the technical aspect, and I think they realized that.
So you're running this giant business for Walmart. You're running Sam's Club.
Yes.
It's already mentioned, almost $60 billion in sales.
Right.
Huge. If it had been a public company, it'd be a very large public company on its own. And then you decide to leave. Why? Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting. Sam's Club is a fantastic business model, the warehouse club model. It's got membership and loyalty aligned to it, which is one of the greatest engines of retail today. But when you run the Sam's business and the Goliath is $250 billion and you're $60 billion, you're constantly fighting for resources. And it came to a point where we had to declare that Sam's Club was going to be the incubator for technology and for A talent. So I had to eventually turn over my technology to Walmart stores. And I had to turn over my A talent and it was very hard living in Bentonville, Arkansas, bringing in A talent, to the point where I initiated samsclub.com and set it in Silicon Valley. And then that began to be the fuel. And I got it to work as much as I could, and then after that I said, I really want to just freely run a business, unencumbered by having to deliver my best and brightest, over to the other unit. And, I put my corporate hat on as much as I could, But after a while, I knew I had sort of outgrown that opportunity.
Was it a compliment, though, that you were the incubator and you were the one sourcing these leaders?
It actually was a compliment. Sometimes when you're talking to your team, it doesn't always feel like a compliment to them, though, as well. You know, they get attached to Sam's Club and, you know, wanted to be there. So it just became a challenge between what I wanted to grow in terms of my team and what the company needed. And so I decided that also, too, I wanted a different opportunity, and Bentonville is a great little city.
Somehow that's not convincing.
It's a great little city.
She's like gritting her teeth. So you go on the board of Starbucks. You're not actively working at that point.
No.
You know you are going to do something else. You just don't know what it is.
Right.
You made us fully aware of that.
Yes.
You're on the board, and then you're recruited to come inside. Did you expect that call?
Absolutely not. I did not. I think I was actually, I had attended maybe my third board meeting, and I had left the third board meeting. Middle of the year is our strategy discussion, and so we had just, at the time, Amazon and Whole Foods had just merged, and Starbucks was talking about the rapid changes in retail, and so that was my space. So, you know, sort of had at it in that conversation, and it was a good conversation, left there feeling really good, you know, joined the right board. And then I got this call, like as soon as I left the board meeting from Kevin Johnson saying, listen, can you come back to Seattle? And at this point, you know, I'm freewheeling. I'm like, no, I'm on my way to the spa right now. This is part of my down thing. He was like, no, like, can you come back Sunday? I was like, well, maybe next Sunday. So we kind of merged, and somewhere in between, I flew back to Seattle. We began discussions about the opportunity to come in and be a member of the management team. And, you know, I was really thinking about laying down my roots back in Atlanta. And it got my daughter all settled there, and
Teenage
daughter settled back in Atlanta, and lo and behold, this opportunity. And the one thing that had happened to me joining the Starbucks board was just the affinity I had for who that company is. You know, Starbucks is a different kind of company, and it was exactly what I was looking for, but I thought from a board seat. So then I began to entertain it from, you know, this really meets my lifestyle. You know, thinking about partner first. And this is a true story, and you might relate to this story, is that when I was going through my board immersion and they gave me my financial package, I looked at it. And the first thing you do when you're an operator is look at all the expenses, and I'm looking at all the expenses, and I see all of this, you know, spending on partners, on employees. We call our employees partners. And so I'm looking at this, I'm like, this is extravagant, you know, and here's an opportunity for me to lean in and say, why are we doing all this spending? And then I realized, after I began to go further into my immersion, what kind of company this is, that it is absolutely partner first. And if Starbucks has $1, the majority of that dollar is going to go to the partner investment. And I had a eureka light on moment when that happened, because I had read everything about Starbucks, but then to see the deep confidential financials and see that they actually live up to what they actually state, and their social impact and what they're trying to drive is real, really changed my life. So it became a non-discussion. I was on board overnight and joined the company in October of 2017.
What most surprised you about the experience after you were inside and knee-deep in all the work?
What surprised me the most was the concept of the third place in Starbucks and how coffee is such a convener. And so we start all of our meetings off with a coffee tasting. And I'm so think of Walmart. We start our meetings off with the Walmart cheer. Honestly, you have to cheer before you start. And it's, you know, give me a W, give me, okay, it's a long thing. And so then I switch over to everyone's, you know, smelling a coffee bean and, you know, take a slurp. And I'm like, whoa.
Which one's better?
Which one's better? Do I want to be a cheerleader, or am I just going to chill and have a great cup of coffee? And I think that that really surprised me, that, you know, for the environments I've worked at in the past, that you're in an environment where you are allowed to think, you're admired for your best, bringing your best thoughts to work, about having a collaborative discussion about what's best for the company. and starting it off with something like coffee and a conversation. And that was my biggest surprise for me. I actually thought that it would be just run really hard. Starbucks had a ton of success. I mean, Howard Schultz started this company almost 50 years ago from one store. And to think that it's 30,000 stores now, I just actually thought it was hard pressing and hard running. And it is it is still just that, kind of sense of urgency, but it's a whole different style to it. And I really like it.
I know you did not overlap with Howard as CEO, but the time that you had while he was chair, what did you learn from Howard?
So actually, I learned a lot from Howard. Interesting enough, the way I was introduced to my board seat was through Howard. Howard came to Walmart stores as a keynote speaker to our high potential leaders. And our CEO, Doug McMillan, was to do that interview. And something came up, and I'm saying maybe an hour before, he's like, Roz, you got to do this. Howard's here. I was like, oh my gosh. So lo and behold, actually, I had a lot of friends that worked in the local regional team for Starbucks. So I called them and said, hey, your CEO is in town. Come over to the home office. So I set up this great room because everybody wants to see their employees. So we had this great room for Howard to see his employees. And then Howard and I did this interview. And it should have been like this, about 30 minutes. It went on for an hour, and people were just seeing us. We were talking. We forgot there was an audience out there. And people were like, what are you all doing? And we just really had it. And Howard said, listen, come out to Seattle sometime. And I said, sure. So I brought my leadership team out there. We toured the Seattle Roastery, had a great time. He brought me into, he said, well, come on over to the office. I went over to the office, and we're just chatting. I was like, great, I get to meet Howard Schultz. Then he takes me down to this room, and he uses his ID and swipes it, and this room opens up. And there's these beautiful renderings of these buildings. He says, I've got this vision. He said, it's about these roasteries. And he was like, look, the first one's going in, and you've seen the one in Seattle, but I've got this idea in Shanghai. What do you think? And I'm like, oh, this dude is serious. I mean, this is who does this? Nobody but a Howard Schultz, right? And so I got intrigued with that kind of vision that he had. And he was so anxious and it was just he was like, Roz, this is going to be like the Willy Wonka of chocolate. He said, but it's going to be coffee. And I was like, yeah, right? And so, he's had a lot of caffeine today. And so, but I'm interested. And so, so then he said, well, what do you think? He said, you know what, you got to join my board. I said, no, I'm on one board. I'm on the Lockheed board. Love it. I'm not going to do anything else. And I said, but if anything changes, I'm going to call you. And I knew I was thinking of doing something different. So I called him back and said, hey, leaving the company. I'm going to make some changes. And he asked me to join the board, and I did. And so Howard has had a huge influence on me ever since that moment. And then you all see the beautiful roastery here in Chicago that's actually a combination of his vision. So.
Well, after he did the interview with you, he was in the car on the way to the airport, and he called me.
No way.
And he said, Roz Brewer, what do you think? And I said, rock star.
Wow.
And he's like, what if we could get her? I said, go for it.
Really?
Yeah. Called me in the car.
Wow.
As he does.
I never knew that.
Rock star.
Thank you. Thank you.
I was excited about that call. So you've touched on two things that I want to go a little bit further on. You just ended with the roasteries, so let's go there because this Chicago roastery, it's
off the charts, right, Shauna? Shauna, stand up. This is our, Shauna, please stand up. This is Shauna McKenzie-Lee.
Yay.
She runs the unit. She's our general manager. She's our general manager for now. She's going to do great things. This is just the beginning.
No doubt. So it is the talk of Chicago. First of all, I appreciate it because I'm sure it's true with Mary too. We get credit for this. It's like you brought the roastery to Chicago. I'm like, yes, I did. I certainly did. Pick the location and everything. No, it has really been, first of all, it's cold. Howard calls me, he's like, people in Chicago are crazy, Mellody. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, it's cold outside and the line is really long.
Yes.
And I only live a few blocks from the store, so I see it a lot
when
I'm going to work. What has led to this frenzy?
So it's been crazy. So our Shanghai roastery is probably our top performing roastery in the fleet. We have 6 of these units. Chicago's going to surpass Shanghai. Absolutely.
Woo!
It is going to surpass Shanghai. And I love that we're all winning in this whole thing now that they all report under my structure. I'm really happy. But you know, what's happening here is that, first of all, it starts with the iconic building, the original Crate and Barrel flagship. So I know Gordon Siegel is here, and it absolutely starts with that building, Gordon. It is amazing. I think second is the interior design. We had a best-in-class chief designer on this unit, and that team is amazing. If you just see just how impeccable every fine detail has been covered.
Those leather railings.
We talked about the leather railings yesterday.
I noticed that.
My husband asked a question like, who did that, right? Yeah. And so, and you know, like when you look at it, it's just everything about it is beautiful. I think the setting's beautiful. I think also too, Chicago is a very special city. I mean, I'm not saying that because I'm sitting here in your city, but it is special. It is the first place that we decided to place a coffee store outside of Seattle. And there is something about this city that is amazing, that is outpacing. I mean, our roastery in New York is doing well, but I think that this location, who Chicago is, the way we have detailed the inside of the building is amazing. I think the way it opened, Shauna and her leadership, we've got absolutely great partners working in this unit, and they're excited to be there. So we have high hopes for this. I mean, it has just been amazing from the very beginning.
And is it tourist, local? Do you know yet?
It is. We don't know everything yet, but we do know that it's both, because we actually had forecasted that during the cold season, it's going to tank, right? And it's going to absolutely, you know, people will be cold, the shopping season will be beyond them, and we're seeing the days are picking up, right? And so it's a challenge for us because we didn't plan this level of success at all. And so it is both. It's because I get the same calls that you do. Roz, I'm in line. I'm like, these are like my classmates from Spelman. I'm like, I thought you lived in Phoenix. Yes, but I'm in Chicago in line. Can you get me in? You know, hook a friend up. And I'm like, okay, so I'm calling Sean. I'm like, really, I just have one more. This one's my line sister. Can you like get her in? So Shauna and I mean, you guys have the Starbucks gift cards. I'm gonna have to get her a different kind of gift card because there are people who are coming from all over for this. And actually, we have a lot of CEO leaders and large leaders in this country that have taken their leadership team to every one, and I mean globally, every one of our roasteries around the world to show them how high is high. Because these units are amplifying our brand like nothing else that we could ever do. And so I know you guys are going to hear from Brian Cornell, but he has been at every one. He was at the New York opening. He was at this opening here. He has really done a fantastic job in terms of showing, and Nike does the same thing. So big brands that matter really see that these flagships are important to your brand.
Why did we do it?
You know, we did it for just that reason, is because Starbucks, it is, like I said, a different kind of company, but we wanted to show just how high you could take this thing. We are not a fast coffee company. We can we can service you as quickly as you like, but that's not our business. And the way we think about coffee agronomy, the way we think about the partners in our stores, the way we want our customers to view us, that we're not your everyday retailer or restaurant. We wanted to just show the world just how high is. And so the idea of Willy Wonka, I think, is living out in true life. And I think it's just an absolutely beautiful example. I mean, quite honestly, you know, we're having so many conversations in the company around inspired by the roastery. We want this in our regular stores and cafes, and can we do it? But all of our innovation is starting in these roasteries, from beverage to operations to a lot of the back of the house work that's being done.
So you are actively involved with two disruptors. We disrupted coffee.
Yes.
I mean, who drinks Folgers, right? No one, right?
No one.
Okay, so we disrupted coffee, and now you're on the board of Amazon.
Yes.
And when you talk about a company that is disrupting, I mean, there's nothing like it. Right. What is that room like?
My head has been
I've not
spinning.
actually gotten to ask you this.
Yeah, yes. So February will celebrate my a full year on the board of Amazon. And I'm so glad that I'm in Seattle and I can get over to that office, because it's like drinking from a fire hose, just trying to learn everything, Mellody, that they're doing. And I know Jeff has, you know, a very similar vision in life to really change the world, and he is in fact doing that. It is a fascinating discussion. The thing that I love the most about Amazon is what happens in that boardroom is that Jeff is just a fanatic about asking your opinion. He wants to hear from you. You cannot go to a board meeting with Jeff Bezos and sit there and say, well, I read the materials and I was thinking about. He's like, you don't come here to think about, you come here to talk to us, right? And so that's really different because sometimes, you have a board seat and they want you to endorse and sign. Jeff's not going to tolerate that.
Does it put pressure on you?
Absolutely. I have sleepless nights, night sweats. I'm like, what are they going to ask me? But I've tried to be a value there because I am local. I get involved with a lot of things that they're doing and, having some really good discussions and creating new relationships there. And they are a fantastic, fantastic company. I'm learning a lot.
What is retail going to look like in 25 years? Will we go into a store to buy things?
So here's my vision and my view on this topic is that I think that retail, it's all about who's going to win in the middle. I think that it will always be physical retail, and then there will be digital retail. And the winner is going to be who wins in the middle of that. Because some of the recent numbers we're learning is that Gen Zers want the experience of being physically in front of something that they're interested in. But what that means is retail is going to change, Mellody, because if you're not creating an experience for them once they're in that physical building, you lose. And so this is why I feel so strong about a Starbucks and an Amazon, because they're rethinking about what happens when you do walk into that building. When you walk into an Amazon Go store, you feel like you've stolen something. I don't know if you all have been in an Amazon Go. You walk in there, you put everything in your bag, and you walk out. Now, just think about that. Years ago, you'd be arrested, right? Now there's digital ways to do that. So if you fast forward 25 years from now, I don't know what that physical building is going to look like. It will be dramatically different, but it will be both physical and it will be digital as well. And so, I look forward to the day where it's easier. And, for those that complain that, I don't like a digital experience, just think about how busy our lives are. And I commend companies like Amazon that make it easier for me to shop when I want to shop and then give me access to goods. And then there's other retailers. Like I love to walk through. I love old department stores. I love walking Bloomingdale's and Saks on Fifth Avenue just to see the theater of how they've set Christmas, right? That to me is so interesting because they've thought through. How am I going to merchandise? What's going to attract the eye? What is the color trend? And so you learn. And I just think that it's going to be the experience and the physical that really keeps people engaged in both parts of this.
Is that theater changing dramatically? So you walking through that department store, a lot of people don't appreciate that experience anymore. Right. Or do you think that experience inside of the department store will change?
I think so. So for instance, I love when I walk into a department store and they acknowledge me. And so if I shop frequently in a store, I want someone to recognize me. And so there's some digital ways to be recognized, right? You can geofence the building. As soon as they walk in, you're alerted that Mary Dillon's just walked into your building, right? And then you can address her, eyes up, and have a great conversation, but kind of know what she's purchased, right? And so that feels a little eerie, but for me, I sort of like it because you recognize that you want me there. My dollar matters. And you kind of know something about me, so while I'm gazing around, you're going to help me, right? And so I think that there's some things like that are changing the theater inside a store. And then I think it's also, too, what's on the shelf and what's not on the shelf, because you learn from what's relevant and what's not relevant. And so I just think that, this whole idea of theater shows up. I like the idea, one of my favorite stores to go to is Kith in New York, right? Because, I hear the trends in music, I look at shoes, they brought in entrepreneurs. The other thing that they do so well are their partnerships. And so partnerships are so interesting to see. Who would have ever thought that, Beyonce and Adidas would come together, right? For Ivy Park and Adidas, right? And so that's so fascinating to me that partnerships create theater and excitement and change the whole view of retail. And so I'm excited and encouraged about what this could look like. It's not a doomsday for me that, I'm going to be doing everything on my phone. I think I'm going to have the luxury of doing both.
Can it survive this period? I mean, the door's closing every year. Yes. We keep getting these record numbers. Yes. We've had iconic retailers go away.
Yes.
We don't have Toys R Us. Toys have been absorbed in a very different way.
Right.
Inside of Walmart and inside of Target and all sorts of other places, as well as Amazon. But it's not the same experience. Remember, I have a 6-year-old and my husband saying when Everest was 4, I have to take her into a toy store. She's not going to see a lot of these anymore. It was kind of sad that you couldn't go to this. Now, yes, you could walk up and down the aisles of Walmart.
Right.
But will they survive? Millions of jobs being lost every year. around this?
So part of the winning piece of this too is what's happening in supply chain and logistics. Efficiently getting goods to stores in and out, and how you actually train and develop your employee base. And so I think there is a stronger cost position that these companies can take, but it is the investment in tech that enables a much more efficient things like supply chain and the way you manage labor in your stores. Those kinds of investments sort of free up so that you can invest in the experience. And so what we've seen is that some companies haven't done their best job of getting their cost position together. And I would just encourage those in retail to really look at true cost and think about self-funding yourself to say, if I can pull a dime out of my business, you got to reinvest it back in there. And if you're publicly traded, you got to tell that story to the street to say, look, I'm investing for the long haul. This is retail is, if you don't look at it as the long haul and invest along the way on those things that are game changers, you lose. You've got to have the right conversations internally to set the vision, and you've got to have that externally with your institutional shareholders so that they can understand you're on a journey. And if you're not investing in tech and people, you lose. And so there will be some vetting out, but more that get that story and can create that, what I'll call sort of a productivity loop, they're the ones that are going to win.
Is every company a technology company now?
I have to say yes to that question. I think every company, you're only as strong as your tech underpinnings. I think that we have to think about what machine learning and artificial intelligence can do for our companies instead of saying too much tech for me. There's likely a road too far. For example, Starbucks. We'll do all the digital stuff in the world, but you will never, ever walk into a Starbucks and have a partner not serving you. The same week that we opened our largest roastery in the world, our largest unit in the world, we actually opened the smallest unit in the world in New York City in Penn Plaza. And what we've done is we flipped the kitchen and the preparation of the drinks to the back, and in the front, you have almost a concierge that meets you with your beverage. And so we call it a pickup store, but you know what our customers call it? They call it a walkthrough. Because when they walk in, they've already put their order in through mobile order and pay. Their name is on a board. They know when their drink is coming. And then the barista knows that Jane is coming in, and she's like, Jane, your macchiato, 2 seconds. And then they hand it to them. And so it's digital, but it's much more personal because she's beyond the bar. She's out there handing you your beverage when you get off the train at Penn Plaza and going to your office. And so it's a very humanized digital experience, and that's an example of both coming together.
So I'm going to pivot a little bit because in the setup, there was a discussion about diversity and inclusion and issues related to race and gender. And I'm going to turn this question on its head. How have your race and gender contributed to your success?
Wow, that is turning it on its head. Just think about that one. How has it contributed to my success? So one of the things that Mellody, I've had to do is to advocate for myself in some environments where I knew I was not naturally welcomed, right? And advocating for myself could do one of two things. It could be off-putting because it looks like I'm wearing my resume on my sleeve, but it can actually be a teachable moment for why I feel I'm important to that environment. And I've always had to balance those two between being, sort of humble Roz, right? Because, sometimes I walk in settings and people will say, okay, you work at Starbucks, so which store do you work at? I'm like, I work at the big one in Seattle, right? But, people could get confused because I don't really wear my corporate stature on my sleeve all the time. And so for me, Mellody, I think how it has worked for me and against me sometimes is how I've had to balance that fine line. And it's been delicate at sometimes. And sometimes I've had to throw in the towel when I said, okay, I've pushed this diversity as far out as I can get it, and it's time for me to turn that over to someone else. There's times where I have felt fully supported. I will say in my Starbucks experience, it's great to have your vice chair that looks like you. And then I think there's times where it's just been daunting. Sometimes when I'm mentoring young women, I want to give them the best, hey, stay at it. But I also want to give them the realities that there's just some things that haven't changed.
Do you think that when you've been in the challenging positions, have they been directly related to the diversity and inclusion mantle that you have to carry? Do you feel like you have to carry that mantle? You've said you've handed it off at times. What is that responsibility like?
So I personally take that responsibility, whether it's bestowed on me because I'm naturally born a double minority or not. I take it on because I think it's important. When I walk in rooms and I see young women, I was at the Aspen Institute, I think a few people were there, and this young woman just stood up and she looked at me and she just burst into tears, and I was like, wow, she needs me to be there for her. Because she hadn't seen, a woman of color in a role like mine. And so I take it personally, and then it's bestowed upon me, right? And so that responsibility to me is significant. And if I'm going to make a difference, if I have that chance to make a difference, I'm going to try my hardest to do that. So I feel like I take it on personally, and at some point I want to spread it. I always look at, when I'm in a room with all men, I think it's a teachable moment. What can I bestow upon them? Even if they're interested to learn more about what is it like to be a Black woman, I want to help them understand, because a lot of this is ignorance. It really is. A lot of it is ignorance.
So did you take up the mantle, or was it bestowed upon you when we had the incident in Philadelphia with the two men who were arrested waiting for another customer?
Yeah, that was really an unfortunate situation. So for me, that one was deeply personal. I've told this story before, but when that happened, I had just joined the company. I was with the company in my operating role for about 6 months. And when it happened, it was picked up very prominently on Black social media. So it hit me a little quicker than it hit the company. And I recall, so my son was the same exact age as those two gentlemen. And on a given Saturday, he actually dressed everything like those two guys. My son was living in Brooklyn at the time. And so it was deeply personal to me that these two young Black males could get arrested, because I knew right away that could be my son. And then it didn't help that, my son, who's all into social media, is texting me saying, "Mom, what the heck? What are you gonna do about this?"
So you knew it was bad.
I knew it was bad.
Instantly.
I instantly knew it was bad. As soon as I didn't need to see the video of the two gentlemen being, marched out of the store. I didn't need to see any of that. I knew it was bad from the very beginning. And my heart sank. And I was in San Francisco. I immediately began to get myself back to the East Coast, and I made it to Philadelphia as soon as I could. And I knew that this could be a defining moment, and I knew that this happened under my leadership. This was one of my stores in Philadelphia. And I knew at this point, everything that I had uniquely been engaged in over my career, this was when I was going to be truly tested and had to bring it to bear. So I had to reach down deep in, everything I had. I had to hold back the tears, because just seeing those two gentlemen, in that way was not an image I wanted plastered anywhere for my community. I was worried of what could happen to those two young men. I felt very maternal. I felt very corporate. I felt very Black. I felt very everything all at one time. And I had to, through that whole experience, I had to keep turning on and off channels, right? Get in front of the media, talk about what's right. Get in front of the partners of Starbucks and say, "We're committed to you." And then get back to my son and say, "Son, I think I got it. Thanks for giving Mom a swift kick." But I had just, it just took everything from my toes to my head to,
What would it have been like if you weren't there?
I have every bit of confidence that Starbucks would have done the right thing. It's that kind of company. I think their how was informed by my living. And your living as well, Mellody, but I think it was informed by my living, because what you say and what you do really, really matters. Words matter, especially in a moment like this. And while their heart and their intention were in the right place, some things could have gone off the rail. Like for instance, a big question about, the store manager. And so I looked at, we let the company down because we had antiquated policies. We're at third place. If you're going to welcome the society into your stores, well, what about the society? And so what's happening outside is going to come inside. Have we trained our partners for that? Absolutely, they were not prepared. why we had, you know, a young woman from Lima, Ohio, running a store at Spruce and 18th in Philadelphia, that was a recipe for disaster. And we should know better than that, right? I imagine that the customers would have liked to have seen, you know, themselves reflected in that store, and we didn't have that reflection in that store. So I think there's some things that I was able to inform and move pretty quickly on that I think assisted the company in doing a fantastic job, I think.
What do you think makes you effective?
I think my voice, I think, you know, not a lot of fear on my part. You know, I always think, what do I have to lose, right? You know, John and I, we know how to live off of $50,000 if everything went to hell in a hay basket. We know how to peel our lives and get it in the right place because our values are so strong, our sense of family is so strong, that I don't worry about losing. I just worry about not giving and not making an impact. I worry about that more than anything else. And so I sort of develop myself in that way and direct myself in that way. So I think my voice.
There's a lot of talk, especially in the Black community, about first and onlys. And you have a lot of first and onlys. I have those too. How do you feel about that? Being the first this, the first that, the only.
Yeah, I don't like it. And you know, I'm just going to step right out there and say it's actually not getting any better. You know, there's fewer of us in top leadership roles in companies, and that really worries me for all the work and conversations that, you know, I've had and others have had. It's just getting, it's not, I don't like where we are right now. So this first and only to me is, I don't want to use the word insulting, but it's like, you know, it's not a good thing. I don't think it's very positive.
You've always built very diverse teams around you. How do you do that?
It's deliberate. It's deliberate and it's hard work because sometimes you have to look at your pipeline and you have to snatch people up. And then you have to be their biggest champion. And you can't, and when you do that, you can't just leave them there. You've got to develop them. And it's a really true, and you know, what I would say is a personal investment to do that. And when I say deliberate, you have to really take the scope of the work and say, what do I envision for this business and how am I going to get there? And then who's the best talent? And then does that best talent reflect diversity? And when it doesn't, sometimes you have to say, okay, I'm going to take a person who is absolutely high potential and a rock star, but is embedded in the organization, and I've got to get them up, right? And so I've got to be deliberate and get my team to do that and get the company to support them. So it's a deliberate decision, Mellody.
Do you think by virtue of being a woman and person of color, you see that risk differently than a white male would see it as you are pulling that person up?
Yes. So I guess, first of all, I would have to correct you. I don't see it as a risk. I see it as an opportunity. And I think that that's what I try to do.
But some would see it as a risk.
Some would see it as a risk. And and that's my argument, is I say to them, this is an opportunity for us to be step change different. Don't you want to be on the right side of history having the right discussions? And so I always position it as an opportunity to do something great. And I think, you know, that fuels a different frame of mind versus achieving a number or showing favoritism or any of those kinds of things. It's about being part of something great.
I worry about discussions versus actions because there are a lot of discussions.
Right.
So how do you think you get people who are not you making that decision? How do you move your colleagues, peers, people you've worked with, when you're in Amazon, all of these organizations, how do you move it from discussion to action?
Yeah. So peer accountability is an interesting thing. You know, leaning over to your peer in a meeting and say, did you really mean to say that? Or can you explain to me? And they're like surprised that you would even ask them, oh, did I say something wrong? Or, you know, what's wrong with my thought process? And it's interesting, every time, and I call it elbowing, you know, every time I have to elbow my peer and say, rethink that statement you just made, it changes the conversation, and they know that someone's watching, right? Well, here comes Roz again, and I'm okay with that.
But does that become problematic? Because does that create distance and tension?
You know, I don't allow that to happen. Again, I think they're all teachable moments, and I just have to take people aside and say, let me help you understand why this is a good thing for us to do. You know, it's not contentious. I don't try to come off to be abrasive, but I'll say, can you rethink that, and let me help you rethink that. And I'll tell you, to be honest with you, 9 times out of 10, people say, well, can you help me, because I don't really understand that. And so was that wrong? I was like, yeah, it was wrong. Well, why is it wrong? And so people really do want to learn. That's why I'll say it's ignorance, but it's not so much. I have not been in many situations where it's been abrasive, like, I don't like that person because they're black. It's that I didn't know that I offended someone.
Have you ever been held back on giving the feedback? I was going to say afraid, but I don't think of you as being afraid.
Have I ever been hesitant to give the feedback? Early on in my career, yes. And then after a while, no. Because again, I just feel like I have nothing to lose and only to gain. Because I want my environment to be, I want somebody to nudge me if I say something wrong.
Does that come with age and success? I just wonder, is that just a natural, that you become more brave, emboldened?
Yeah. I would say a little bit of that is yes, but if you've hired some millennials these days, there's nothing they won't say. So there's no age and progression there. They come with it. So that's why I love to. They're forcing the discussions, which I love. And so no, I would have to say, if you get some millennials in there, that whole conversation changes.
Is there anything left on your list to accomplish that you haven't accomplished? Like where you sit with yourself and say, I'm not there yet on checking this off the list. Or is there a list even?
Yeah. Yes, there's a list. For those of us who are parents in the room, you never stop parenting. And so I just think about my son and daughter, and I'm not finished yet. And I don't think I'll ever be finished there. I think the other piece is at some point I want to just, put my bags up in this corporate thing, and I really think I want to teach. And I think I want to do that at the higher ed level. Can't do the little ones, but I could do the big ones. And I think that's what I want to do at some point.
What would you teach?
I would really love to be sort of a visiting lecturer on ethics. I think that personal integrity is lost right now. And I'd love to think about a chance for me to be in a big forum and lift the thinking amongst people. And I think about that a lot lately, that's burning inside me.
What's the best advice you ever got?
Let's see. I think about when I was leaving for Spelman College, my mother said something to me. She said, always be a lady. And I was thinking, wow, okay, that's kind of old-fashioned. Does that mean like make sure, I'm all perfectly dressed and my hair is combed and all those things? But she knew from that little girl in 3rd grade that could be a little bit rambunctious. I think she was giving me that advice, say what you need to say, do what you need to do, but bring it back home to center and be that person that rises above. And so that has stuck with me. I knew what she was saying. At the time I didn't, but now I know for sure what she was saying. She knew that I would be in some rough and rugged environments, and she never wanted me to lose my integrity or my character.
What do you tell your son and daughter, and is it different?
It's not very different. I tell my son and daughter one simple word. I tell them to go. And that allows them to decide how they want to go, where they want to go, what they want to do, but go. And I hope that they feel encouraged that they can do anything that they want to.
When you think about advice that you give to your teammates, would that track with what you would tell your children?
That's interesting. So maybe what I would tell my teammates, I'd ask them to join me in trying to make a difference. Join me in creating something that the world has never seen before. And that's an environment where everybody can succeed and feel accounted for and feel accepted and engaged so that they can bring their best selves to work.
How much of being an outsider made you compassionate, empathetic, and successful?
I think a lot of it. And I do find myself being an outsider many times, and I think it makes me fight harder and make me do my best work every day and to be counted for and make a difference.
So I've thought about this a lot, and I haven't joked with you about it, but I wonder if other people do. Your last name is Brewer, and you work at Starbucks. So were you destined to work at Starbucks? Like, what's the story, Mr. Brewer?
That is so funny.
Do people talk about that?
No, I married this guy 31 years ago. He was cute. What can I say? I mean, I never knew it would get here, but it did. I'm grateful for it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Roz Brewer.
Thank you. Thank you so much.